Spiritual Sleep. A sermon by David Welsh. Romans 13:11. It is high time to awake out of sleep. This voice I would at present lift up among you. There is a natural sleep from which you are all at present awakened. With the return, or before the return of the light, you aroused yourselves from your slumbers. From a state of total insensibility and inaction, or from a world of dreams as idle and unsubstantial, you became alive to the realities around you. But though you have shaken off your bodily sleep, there is a sleep of the soul more deep and more deadly, and it is from this sleep that I tell you that it is high time to awake. To this end I shall, in the first place, show you in what sense you may be said to be asleep. And in the second place I shall endeavor to impress upon your minds that it is high time to awake. I am then, in the first place, to show in what sense you may be said to be asleep. And in order to understand the nature of spiritual sleep, it may be necessary to consider the natural sleep to which it is compared. What is natural sleep? This is a question that baffles the ingenuity of the wisest and the most profound, and no account or explanation can be given of this most mysterious appearance of our mysterious nature. But though no one can ascertain the essence, everyone can describe, or at least everyone knows the appearances of this state. It consists in the cessation of voluntary thought and action. The soul has no perception of all that is around it, and is either in a state of entire inactivity, or is busied with the fantasies of the imagination, which are altogether unreal, and which yet it believes to be realities. Though the blessings of providence and the beauties of nature are spread around the sleeping man, and invite him to awake and taste of them, or though dangers gather and threaten his destruction, he is equally insensible to both. He is busy with a world of his own creation. Though to us he appears motionless, senseless, almost lifeless, he is all activity. But it is in a land of shadows. He is pursuing or pursued by the phantoms of his own mind, and his breast swells with joy or is sunk in sorrow. It exults in hope or is distracted with terror, and yet all the while there is not any real cause of either happiness or suffering, and all that he imagines he sees or possesses, or is deprived of, or exposed to, is nothing but the unsubstantial and fleeting delusions that his own frames. You are already weary of a description so common and so tedious. And yet, this is a description that applies to every one of you who is living in a state of sin. You are blinded to all the important realities that surround you, and the objects that occupy and interest you are nothing better than dreams. When we look at our brethren, they appear all active and alive, or at least drowsiness and slumber seem far from them. But when we attend more closely, we listen to their words and make ourselves acquainted with their feelings, and see the pursuits they are engaged in, we can then discover our mistake, and perceive that in reality they can be considered as little better than men walking in their sleep. They see none of the important realities around them. There is a God who filleth all things with his presence, and everything in the heavens and everything in earth is a proof that he is there, and indeed is to be considered chiefly as a sign of his power, or his wisdom, or his goodness. And yet the sinner forgets the Creator in the creature, and lives without God in the world. The fashion of this world passeth away. Everything is brief and transitory, and the earth itself is shortly to be succeeded by another state of existence. But the sinner knows not, or thinks not of this. And though life and immortality, or death and destruction, are revealed to his view, he will not look upon them or will not think of them. His whole soul is engrossed with the things that are temporal, and in his love of this world he forgets that which is to come. And what are the objects about which he is interested? They can be considered as little better than illusions of the mind. The follies that delude the thoughtless, the cares that agitate the worldly minded, the sins that lead captive the wicked, what are they better than sick men's dreams? Here is a man, and one passion has taken hold of his soul and almost expelled all the rest. And what is it to which his mind is so strongly bent? To gain the praise of men. He is happy when he receives it, and miserable when it is denied to him. Everything that he does, everything that he says, has a reference to the opinions of others, and his peace of mind is placed at the mercy of their opinion. The least token of approbation elates him above measure, and he is as much cast down when they withhold it. Now let us lay hold of and examine this object of his pursuit, and we shall find that there is nothing more uncertain, more empty, more unsatisfactory. In the efforts that it makes, the passion frustrates its own purpose. The knowledge that we thirst for praise makes men despise us, and the signs of it that we exhibit and the means we employ to gratify it excite their pity or their scorn. When it is obtained, and it scarcely ever is by those who make it their single object, it is scarcely possible to preserve it. And even when it is preserved, what is it? Weigh it. It is light as air, and profiteth nothing. Measure it. It shrinks into vanity, and at best is a shadow and a name. But there is another who thinks he is laboring for something more substantial than the dreamer for applause. His thoughts are on amassing worldly treasures, or at least on procuring a competency of the good things of life. But does he not know that riches make to themselves wings and fly away? That he who hasteth to be rich falleth into a snare? That moths corrupt, that thieves break through and steal, the most enduring and best secured of earthly treasures? Is he not then in reality a miserable and impoverished man, who is wasting his time and building himself up in dreams of fancied plenty, while heavenly treasures are around him, which he will not awaken to secure? It might easily be shown that the objects of all the other earthly passions are equally vain, and that everyone that pursues them with ardor is an unhappy victim to the delirious dreams of a feverish sleep. And the man who yields to the violence of wrath, or gives himself up to the depths of sorrow, or is transported into the laughter of the sinful mirth, of which Solomon said that it was mad. What are they but men tossed upon the agitated billows of an unquiet rest? If they were to arouse themselves and shake off their drowsy sleep, and view their real situation, the turmoils of their troubled breasts would depart like the visions of the night when a man awaketh. The ambitious would cease to court the praise of man, if he would awake and compare it with the praise of God. The worldly minded would lift his desires to the treasures that abide. The passionate would be soothed in his mind when he realized the presence of the Almighty. The sorrowful and afflicted would change his mourning into joy when he looked forward to the blessed result of sanctified affliction. And the intemperate and profane would be sobered at once from his boisterous mirth if he opened his eyes to the presence of an offended deity. These are all extreme cases, but if the representation holds in regard to them, it must be still more applicable to those who are in a great measure insensible to this world as well as to the next, who waste away their lives in slothful indifference, who seem to have no cares beyond the preservation of their lives, which are scarcely worth preserving, useless to others, and burdensome to themselves. Their whole life seems passed away in a dream. A lethargy has laid hold of their souls. And to every call to exertion their words are represented by the wise man to be, yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. Is not then the view that is often given of wicked men in Scripture, as those that are asleep, a faithful one, as we have seen that they exhibit the great characteristics of that state? They do not perceive the realities that exist around them, and either busy themselves with unsubstantial vanities, or are sunk in a state of listless apathy and unconcern. Has there never, my friends, arisen in your minds a suspicion of this description? That you were walking in a vain show? That you were disquieting yourselves in vain? That you were passing away your lives in a dream? When you have turned your eyes backward to a remote period of your lives, and remembered all the feelings that then filled your bosom, the joys you thought could never have an end, the sorrows that you thought had cast a shade upon your life forever, the objects that you thought would be satisfied with, could you but once win and possess them, they have all passed away like a shadow of a shade, and scarcely left the resemblance of them behind. But then you were as much in earnest as you are now. You had as little doubt of the value of what you desired, or hoped for, or were deprived of. But time has shown you that they were all a delusion. And may not a time come when you will discover that the objects on which you have now set your heart are equally vain, and that all the present forms one of a life of dreams? Or if the sorrows and pains of the past extend their influence through the present hour, freezing the source of every joy and crushing the heart under their deadening weight, have you never felt that sorrow and grief are vanity? That could you but bestir yourself and think and feel like a man, like a Christian, there might be yet joy for you on earth, and joy over you in heaven? Or in the midst of happiness in which your heart delighted itself, has not disease or misfortune, or the death of some beloved friend, awakened you from your visions of enjoyment, and taught you that all was vanity and vexation of spirit? We have hitherto been speaking of those who are in a state of sin, and I trust it appears that they may be said to be in a state of sleep. But it is to be observed that the words of our text, as used by the apostle, though perfectly applicable to sinners, are not addressed to them, but to the redeemed of the Lord. This appears probable from the spirit of the whole chapter. But the concluding clause of the verse leaves no doubt upon the subject. The reason that the apostle employs to show that it is time to awake out of sleep is stated to be because their salvation was nearer than when they believed. I shall employ the remaining part of this head in showing in what circumstances the righteous may be said to be asleep. It is obviously in a different sense that, in any circumstances, the righteous and the wicked are said to be asleep, and the difference is this. The ungodly are in a constant state of lethargy or delirium, while the believer either sinks into it from fatigue or is surprised into it from forgetfulness. The righteous have been awakened from the dead, and Christ has given them life. And this state of life may be vigorous, or at least healthy, and yet admit of temporary cessation or repose, corresponding to sleep in the life natural. But the unbeliever is in a state of stupor or delirium uninterrupted, and if he is not awakened from it, it must terminate in death. Still, however, the spiritual sleep into which the Christian may fall may be long. It may be dangerous. It may be pernicious. And it is therefore necessary that he should be made aware of it, in order that he too may be convinced that it is high time to awake out of sleep. The Christian church, then, may be said to be asleep when, like the church of Ephesus, as represented in the book of Revelation, he falleth from his first love. When the objects of this world begin to gain an ascendancy in his breast and withdraw him for a time from the contemplation and pursuit of things spiritual. When you do not observe or improve the providences that are to be perceived around you, when you neglect the privileges you enjoy, when you sink into a state of carelessness or indifference or lukewarmness, when your vigilance begins to be relaxed and your diligence to be remitted, when you become less regular in the observance of religious duties and allow worldly occupations to interfere with them, or if you retain the form of devotion while you feel little of its power, or if you live in the forgetfulness of the great truth that at such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh, then you may understand that the words of our text apply to you, and that it is high time to awake out of sleep. Even the best, while they continue in this world, are subject to sad declinations. The world is present, and heaven is remote. The rewards of sin are immediate, and the fruits of holiness, many of them at least, are distant. The things of time are seen, the things of eternity are invisible. The adversaries of the soul are numerous and powerful, and though the spirit may be willing, the flesh is weak, and it is weighed down by the body of this death. In the parable of the 10 virgins, we are told that while the bridegroom tarried, they all, the wise as well as the foolish, they all slumbered and slept. The best of you, therefore, cannot be exempt from a tendency at least to fall away from your steadfastness. You may find the night long, the watch may be dreary, the master tarrieth, your exhausted nature may give way, and you may fall asleep. In the hour of all others, the most awful and the most interesting to man, in the Garden of Gethsemane, the 3 disciples could not watch for 1 hour. And as it was the case with them, so it may prove in the extremity of their trials to other followers of the Lord. There are indeed 2 cases in which the disciples of Christ are most in danger of sleeping at their post. The first is where there is no particular outward call to extraordinary duty, and where there is no temptation to be resisted. In such a case as this, the Christian is in danger of sinking into a state of supineness and security, being apt to rely upon his own strength and to forget his constant dependence upon God. And as he sees no danger to alarm and feels as if he had no work to do, he remits his watchfulness and falls asleep. The other occasion is where the outward works are numerous, constant, and arduous, where the trial is protracted and severe, and, above all, where the arrows of the Almighty are within him, and the terrors of the Lord set themselves in array against him, and where there is no prospect of any relief. Then the soul of a man sometimes sinks within him, and he becomes listless and inactive from the very multitude of the labors that he ought to perform and the troubles he has to endure. This, however, is rarer perhaps in the latter case than in the former, because the magnitude of the trial and the difficulty of the situation lead him naturally to seek the assistance of that God whose assistance is never sought in vain. Instances are, however, to be found in both cases, and in other cases also. And in all of them, the words of the apostle are to be applied, "It is high time to awake." This audio recording was read by Michael Ives. I hope you found it enlightening and edifying. Visit westportexperiment.com for more audio resources, and where I write about parish missions, the care of souls, and all things reformed.